Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mike, for the introduction. I appreciate it. And I'd love to start our panel with a joke while everyone kind of gets adjusted up here on stage. It is cybersecurity themed, so please do laugh and take note what not to do. So if you give a man a fish, he will eat for a day, but if you teach a man to fish, he will spam you for the rest of his life. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Good energy this morning. Thank you all so much. So now that the audience is warmed up and everyone's gotten adjusted here on stage, welcome everyone to the Defending Critical Infrastructure panel. I'm joined by Sonny Westcott, Chief Meteorologist at CISA. I have Sherry Thomas, Enterprise Information Officer at Navy Installations Command. I have Mike Hardy, Chief Architect for Law Enforcement and Justice from Red Hat, and Paul Selby, CISO at the Energy Department. So I'm going to give you all a quick rundown of how this panel is going to go. We're going to talk about what's needed to defend critical infrastructure, how our panelists are protecting technologies, both IT and OT, and we'll check in on that journey of zero trust that everyone keeps hearing about, how natural disasters and human error can impact cybersecurity, and what our panels are thinking about for the rest of 2025 and beyond. So Paul, I'm going to start with you this morning. What does effective coordination look like between agencies when defending critical infrastructure?
I have no idea. Next question. First of all, thank you all very much for being here. We cannot see a darn thing. So I'm just going to pretend this is like 1,000 people in the packed audience and everybody's excited and it's awesome. And in all honesty, I really appreciate everybody being here because I think we have a bit of a problem in our country with cybersecurity. And anytime we can get together and have a discussion about cybersecurity, I think we're heading in the right direction. So thank you very much for being here. So when we look at the critical infrastructure, I think there's a lot of things we have to talk about, right? I mean, so it is very important to collaborate and work together to protect our critical infrastructure. But do we even know the scale of the problem, right? I mean, do we know the depth of the problem we have with legacy systems and the technical debt we have with that? What the issues are with the converging IT and OT networks, right? I mean, it doesn't translate as well as we wanted or as well as we'd hoped. The scope, scale, and frequency of the nation-state threats that we're facing right now. I mean, everybody is familiar with Salt Typhoon because it took so much in the news. But Volt Typhoon was another attack specifically on the energy infrastructure that is incredibly alarming. A lot of the OT in our critical infrastructure is just not capable of supporting the basic cyber hygiene that we need to protect our networks. It's incredibly alarming. We don't have, a lot of it doesn't support sufficient logging, the anomaly detection, multi-factor authentication, just things we cannot do. The incident response in OT is not the same as it is for IT. And probably one of the things we don't talk about enough is the disinformation and the psychological impact that attacks on our critical infrastructure has. So everybody remembers Colonial Pipeline, right? It happened a few years ago. And the cyber incident itself was, wasn't the most complex thing, but do you remember what happened for the week after that, right? I mean, everybody freaked out and went and bought everything and bought gas, and it caused tremendous panic throughout the United States. So that, I think, is something we have to really be concerned about and focused on. So let me just give you some alarming stats, because I love alarming stats. It just makes me warms the cockles of my little black CISO heart.
You and Sonny both. I'm so excited. Let's hear a few, and then Mike, I'd love to hear your perspective as well. Can you give me a few run-through?
I think that's the proverbial hook.
Give us a few, though, because the audience needs to know what these stats are.
Well, we can come back to them, too. I mean, I certainly don't mean to dominate the conversation. I'm all flustered now. So one of the alarming stats is that 40% of the critical infrastructure attacks in the United States last year in 2024 was against the energy sector. So that's particularly alarming to me, because when you look at critical infrastructure, they're like our kids. We all like them more. We all like them, but we all like one more than the rest. The critical infrastructure, to me, is the energy sector is the most critical of the infrastructures, and not because I work in it, but because if you don't have power, the rest of it doesn't matter, right? I mean, healthcare is certainly a critical infrastructure. You cannot do today's modern healthcare if you don't have power. So when you look at all the others, critical infrastructure, energy is the one that they all rely on. There was over 640 reported ransomware attacks on critical infrastructure in 2023. There was over 950 industrial control system advisories in 2023 alone. That's an all-time high. And this was probably one of the more alarming ones to me, is only 13% of the organizations have visibility across both the IT and OT networks. And that speaks to, again, the OT problem that we have, right? I mean, we have visibility across the IT networks, but the OT networks is a bigger issue. That didn't even get to your question, and I'll just punt because we're short on time. But we have to work across. We have to work across agencies. There has to be shared mission, strategic alignment. We have to have clear roles and responsibilities. I think I'm a big fan of joint planning exercises. And those of you who heard me speak before have heard me go on about this ad nauseum. Even at the Department of Energy with our vast resources, because if you're not familiar with the Department of Energy, we've got 17 national laboratories that house some of the most brilliant scientists on this planet that focus on these kind of problems on a daily basis. Even with the vast resources of the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, and the entire U.S. government, we cannot do this on our own. There has to be a public-private partnership that includes the government, industry, and academia to solve the problems we're facing today. Make no mistake, we are already in the thick of it with cybersecurity and what we're facing with the nation-state actors that are attacking us on a daily basis. So, sorry for being so windy.
Sherry, please, yeah.
So, Paul, I'm going to take the hook. Okay, a couple of questions for you all. Everybody understand or know what JADC2 is? Show of hands, maybe? Okay. Do you all understand, Paul also mentioned IT and OT. You understand the significance or differentiation, similarities, any of that? Show of hands.
Seeing a few head nods, a few hands.
Okay. To the question, I look at it from a whole of government approach. And the reason there is my particular installation, my particular building, it has individuals from the Navy, from multiple different commands, individuals from the Department of Energy, right? Navy installations does everything fleet fighter family. For anybody that is on an installation across anywhere in the globe, providing the support from an IT perspective, from an OT perspective, right? Think about elevators, think about public response, for example, police, firefighters, the dispatching of that, right? Think about a lot of legacy technologies too, right? All of these buildings, all of these facilities are not the latest, greatest smart facilities. They're like the houses, right? You got vintage, antique, and you got new construction too. So it's everything in between. Having the appropriate mechanisms to operate. And then is a conglomeration of a lot of different organizations that are coming together. So as Paul mentioned, right, we need to be able to figure out how to share tradecraft. Similar to industry, each one of the individual organizations might be doing their specific areas, but then you need to group together in terms of shared knowledge, right, technology. And so one particular area there is Zero Trust. Zero Trust has 7 pillars from the DoD side with 152 different control areas for threshold and objectives. And that's just for IT. There's a virtual summit going on right now for Zero Trust Symposium that the DoD CIO is hosting. We're getting into OT now. That OT, as I mentioned, morale, welfare, recreation systems. Think about when you get into an installation, the automatic access for entry, right? All the way up to clinics, any kind of facility maintenance, air operations, port operations, and another show of hands. Does anybody know how many elevators Navy Installation Command has? Right, various ranges. I'll give you, how about around 2,000? Around 4,000. Around 6,000? Around 8,000. Okay, we'll stop there. Yeah, we manage a little over 6,000 elevators in different buildings. And what I'm saying with that is that OT system, right? If that has a fault, is it a cyber fault or is it just a mechanical problem? And that's what we're trying to figure out, the totality of the cyber enterprise now, right? Because that has those influences. For example, I need to go talk to my energy partners. I need to talk to my CISA or DHS partners. I need to talk to Department of Treasury, for example, and Department of Transportation in terms of, hey, some kind of congested logistics is happening in the Marianas or Hawaii or Korea. For other agreements, for right? CONUS. And then OCONUS. OCONUS, for example, now we got to deal with those inter country agreements, SOFA agreements, on what is allowed, what kind of electromagnetic interference radiation is possible. So yes, the agencies first need to be able to talk to each other, right? And what is that critical infrastructure? What is a single point of failure in these things, right? Reduce that. And then we need to have multiple different layered defense pathways. So from the defense side, it's coordinated in terms of the geographical combatant command, with the service partner, with the functional command, with our industry and academia partners. So it's a grouping of all of this, right? I'll stop there for that unless someone else wants to take that.
Yeah, I'm gonna, as you heard, Mike said we have our first chief meteorologist here, and we've talked about IT, OT. I want to get a broad understanding of the natural disaster realm. Sunny, can you take us there?
Yeah, so on the weather side of the house, we have tons of fun opportunities to engage, everything from the tornado outbreak that we just had to the torrential 1-in-1,000-year flood event that's underway. Some of the other fun weather events, lightning strikes on everything in the energy sector. So 60% of our wind turbines take lightning strike hits. Some of those are taking about 110 to 111 per year as far as those strikes go. So those are igniting them, flood, taking out the solar. So our energy side of the house can take any level of hit, not just to the specific site, but the interconnectivities. So when we lose energy, the vast majority of our power outages come from severe weather, not from tropical cyclones, not from winter weather, although those do play a role. Weather is the #1 reason that we lose our energy connection systems. Looking at being able to operate with telecoms as well. When we have these disasters, that the weather events notably getting worse, taking on greater intensities because of changes in the upper atmosphere. And we're just playing along with all of the symptoms that are being dealt to us from those changes further up. Some of the other additional threats that come underway, most recently we've noted that there's more human-involved attacks that buddy up with weather events. So we have theft of generators. They're starting to tag when we're doing restoration activity. If you bring a backup generator to a telecom site, somebody may see that you've deposited it there. They'll wait until you leave, and they will come and they will take it, and they'll take it back to their community. They do the same thing with water trucks now. They are starting to look at different ways to break into facilities during these power outages, during known weather events. The blizzard in Baltimore is a really good example. They accessed a school and took all the copper piping out of it. They're also now breaking into the back-end water systems for condo buildings using wire cutters, taking out all of the pipes because they don't know which components they need. Better to just scrap all of it, which is now causing many of these buildings to take weeks to months to repair on the back end, not because of the weather event, but because of the additive of the human nature. We now are seeing a study that just came out recently that all of you will appreciate, which is how can you make your cyber attacks more potent, especially on energy sector? You can buddy them up with a weather event. So you can choose a flooding event because damages, restoration activity, supply chain delays. You can choose a heat event for more mortality risk if that's your goal. And it breaks it out by the different flavors that you can add into your cyber attack. So if we were looking at one threat, we're now looking at all the threats. And of course, it's not just us. Our data centers, extreme heat, drought, and flood. That's happening in Ireland, across the UK. We saw that with the Oracle going down a couple of years ago back in 2022 from a heat wave. Massive delays and latency that came from that. Ireland's drought. A good amount of our internet connectivity goes through Ireland, and for them to be in a drought restricting the general population, they're now turning to say, what if we restrict the data centers because they do use the most water in that area? Same issue over in Silicon Valley here in the US, and then of course we have Wyoming where their data centers are taking hits from severe weather, straight line winds. Virginia now seeing heat waves exceed over 102 degrees, getting very close to that 105 threshold for numerous days on end. Andy Bachman with Idaho National Lab wrote a whole narrative about what would happen if we lost our data centers here. due to heat, due to drought. We've seen this in India, in China, both of which right now are facing incredible heat waves, record-breaking heat right now in New Delhi. So this is becoming a threat across the board. It's every aspect of weather. It's the potency of the air pollution as well. New Delhi shut down for 2 weeks the last 2 years in separate incidences because the air was so toxic. No trucks were allowed in, no one was allowed to drive, no one was allowed to operate sites. So this becomes a bigger concern. It's not just one aspect. It's not one storm event coming across. It's the continuation of the worsening and being able to operate. You're now competing with India and China for restoration materials, for generators, transmission line components. So the supply chain's taking longer, everyone's competing, so price points are fluctuating. And then the supply chain in and of itself is also taking damage. So we know as it gets hotter, aircraft experience more turbulence. You may have noticed that it's getting far more turbulent to fly, period. The same thing with our rails. The rails are starting to kink more because they don't like interconnected materials and heat waves. That's delaying our supply chain across that entire industry. The drought in the river systems delaying barges, more potholes forming because concrete cement weakens in extreme heat. There and by you're repaving your roads over and over again. EVs weigh more than normal cars do. They're wear and tearing the roads more friction buildup. Hotter roads, hotter materials, more burns for your staff. Not being able to be outside for restoration because the high heat, high humidity can be deadly. So there's a variety of ways we can make weather applicable either to your site, your staff, your security, your supply chain, any and all of it. I can make it hit anybody.
No, that.
So the good news, though, in Ireland, I believe the Guinness factory is back online. So and I think they've got the job pretty
just
much
in
recovered.
time.
So yeah, but joking aside, one of the things that we're seeing over the last few years is the TTPs change, right? So a lot of the adversaries, and they're paying attention to these natural disasters. And what happens is that we're seeing an uptake in or an increase in phishing and smishing as a result of these. The adversaries posing as somebody offering to have help, right? Now. We're all at least somewhat interested in cyber because you're in this room, right? But we live and breathe this. But the average American doesn't. The average American doesn't understand what we do and doesn't understand the risks that we deal with on a daily basis. We have been screaming at the top of our lungs since the late 90s about the dangers of cybersecurity. Our messaging isn't working. It's working for us. We get it. The general American population doesn't. And what happens is in these natural disasters that Sunny's talking about, they get followed up with our adversaries hitting your mom, your dad, your grandparents, your kids with, hey, click on this link for, to get immediate relief. They'll act as FEMA, they'll act as somebody, and we're seeing that, that change over and over again. So there's a direct connection between, what Sunny is talking about, these natural disasters, and what we're seeing our adversaries take advantage of on the threat landscape.
Yeah, Mike, I saw you nod your head when we were talking about clicking on those links.
Yeah, so it's funny how fast things happen. I don't know if everyone else here is getting texts on their phone about Doge interviews. Your Doge interview starts in 5 minutes. I'm not even a federal employee, and I'm getting Doge interviews. But no, so
they're fun.
Yeah. So to touch a little bit on everyone's points here is one thing that's very important is understanding protect surface, right? And that's a huge part of zero trust is understanding the infrastructure, the endpoints, right? Think about just our government organizations and our endpoints. Most of our IT infrastructure does not live in our data centers anymore. It lives in a cloud provider's data center, right? So that's a different piece of critical infrastructure. I just came back from Texas, at the southern border. We got to embed with CBP for a week, and we got to see a lot of the interagency collaboration happening between state, local, and federal, going to what they call a fusion center. And FBI agents reside in the center as well as state employees as well as federal employees where they collaborate and share information. And does everyone here understand how big Houston is? The area of Houston. Houston versus Washington, D.C. Imagine my body is Houston. Washington, D.C. is my foot. Like that is the size difference. And the amount of critical infrastructure that they are responsible for in their AOR is baffling that they're able to accomplish this with just state resources. And it's important to understand exactly, to your point, what critical infrastructure is because it transcends IT and buildings. It's waterways. When we were in bed with CBP, they're protecting waterways down in Texas from the cartels. right? To where we're fighting back against illegal fishing and things of that nature. Like, there's a lot happening. It goes beyond IT. The critical infrastructure of our country, to your point, is not understood, right? It's extremely important for everyone to understand the protect surface and understand the endpoints within. What does it take to actually have a secure facility? What does it take to secure a waterway, right? Understanding all these different dynamics that make up this issue. It's a complex issue. And what I would say is what I witnessed down at the border is lots of collaboration, but in a legacy context. How are we sharing information? We're picking up the phone. There's faster ways to do that now with technology. And also, we need to be able to be more efficient in sharing domain-specific information, right? That was some of the feedback that we got, is that there's so much noise, it's hard to pick out what matters when it comes down to protecting that infrastructure.
Yeah, and I'd kind of like to build on that. Sherry, we talked a little bit about, again, protecting those, specifically OT. And so how are you helping your teams monitor and map those services, especially as we talk about, laptops and other portable devices?
Sure. I mentioned zero trust, right? It has so many different areas. It has so many different realms, right? You have network, transport, user, SIEM, SOAR capabilities, all of that encompassing this technology built into something that you need to automate for the user. The bottom line, the basics are the user, the cyber hygiene, the mic that just mentioned, right? We need to understand from a user perspective, the individual that is developing the system, the individual that is using the system, and from the cyber side, CyberScape especially, what is the totality of that cyber terrain, right? Every single system, right? The lights, the cameras, the Wi-Fi, the clocks, everything is tied to some kind of a sensor or some kind of a mechanism that is allowing it to operate. We need to be cognizant of that, right? How does the individual get into that device? It is usually through user authentication, right? ICAM, RBAC, ABAC, right? Role-based or attribute-based access control, right? Is that correct? Are we doing the basics in terms of cyber hygiene, right? And then the awareness of that, whether it be for a sailor, a Marine, or anybody in the government spectrum, to include the defense industrial base, right? Because they have access to these systems too. What are the second and third order effects of someone else, insiders or outsiders, coming into this? And what kind of administrative privileges, what kind of access do they have? Can they have? And then once you start automating these systems, what ability does the automated response have, right? Yes, we can automate SIEM and SOAR capabilities because they will allow you to stop access. But at the same time, they also have the ability to gain access into systems that as a human, you may not be monitoring it from a network operations center or a security operations center. You got to think about all of that. And then I mentioned before, we need to figure out from a whole of government approach, but also from a whole of industry approach, is what I would like to see is need to have everybody talking to each other, right? Yeah, the government has these lab facilities where the industry can integrate their wares and products. But at the same time, if your particular technology, whether it be a data software package, yeah, it needs to ride on some kind of a transport, whether it be ground or undersea cables or satellite. What is that dependency and who's protecting that, right? Because just by protecting just your terrain, right, as Paul mentioned, Sol Typhoon and Vol Typhoon are going after, it does not matter. It's whatever that pipe availability is and the ability to sense the data that is in that pipe, right? So they are agnostic to whether it be a Walmart or a government entity, as long as they can see the specific information to get that to get their mission completed, right? And that is where that adversary, we need to keep up with it. And General Stanton mentions in the walls here, we need to outpace that, right? If you're not, then we're consistently behind, and that tech debt keeps falling more and more because technology will keep advancing. New sensors, new capabilities for monitoring and mapping and everything will be out there. I'll come and talk, and you'll all be like, yes, well, I have these solutions for these particular needs. But at the same time, I need it all to work together, right? Because otherwise we have an interoperability and integration problem, right? I would technically, speaking in terms of the example that was just given, right? We're doing an exercise for hurricane response. We're modeling a hurricane, and then we're seeing what's happening on an installation. So there is a particular example where it will be beneficial if that particular industry partner comes to both of us and says, we have a joint solution that works, right? And then I have energy members in my building. Let's have a joint conversation on that between Paul and I too, right? And then that will be beneficial for the industry partner too, to see both of the angles. Thank you.
Yeah, really getting everyone in the room. And I like what you said about the adversary. It reminds me a little bit of how, water is going to take the path of least resistance, and that's what they're going to do. And I also like that you mentioned zero trust, and I hope no one is rolling their eyes or groaning about it, because it is still very important. And I'd kind of like to talk about how we can foster that change management that you've all kind of been touching on and getting everyone to understand the importance of this. And Paul, do you mind starting us off on that?
No, I do not mind starting us off. The problem is never to get Selby to talk. It's to get Selby to stop talking. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I was speaking at a STEM conference recently, and well, maybe not so recently. I'm old, so everything's relative. But I was speaking at a STEM conference, and I asked the people in the room, and this was at a conference with folks that are in the industry, and I asked for a show of hands. There was about 300 people in the audience. I asked for a show of hands on how many people had changed the password on their home router. Maybe 10% of the people raise their hands, right? That when I talk about us and our messaging not getting out there, and that's kind of where we're at with zero trust, right? I mean, remember after 9/11, we elevated the national awareness or national security alert to orange, and it stayed that way for like 15 years. And after a few years, none of us knew what that meant anymore. We didn't know what what that meant or what we were supposed to do. I think that's where we're at with cybersecurity. I think we've screamed about it so long and made an emphasis on it so much without changing our messaging that people don't know what to do. And I fear we're on the same path with zero trust because people are confused about it. They're like, okay, well, yeah, go get me zero trust. That's not a thing. You can't go buy zero trust. You can't go get zero trust. Zero trust is a mind frame. It's a concept of how we go about security that changes the old concept of we're going to build protection around it, and once you're inside the fortress, then we trust you. Zero trust doesn't mean you take down the wall, by the way. Paul's opinion. I'm not an advocate of let's take down everything and we'll just we'll do everything on an individual basis. I think you should do both. One of the people ask me all the time on a personal basis because they find out what I do for a living, and they're like, well, what should I do to protect my home network? Should I do this? Yes. Should I do this? Yes. Should I do this? Yes. Do it all. You cannot provide too many protections. When it comes to zero trust, we need to really make sure that we educate people that it is not a destiny. You don't get there and say, boom, I'm zero trust. It is a change in the way we go about doing business. You have to manage this with all of the stakeholders. It cannot be us in cybersecurity, and I don't mean to sound like I'm kicking a dead horse, but you cannot just be us. And what we're doing, folks, is not working. We have to change our messaging to get the stakeholders and bring them into the tent with us. We need to make them champions for what we do. And we can't do that by fear alone. We can't do that by, this is what's going to happen if you don't do this. We have to figure out a way to make them want to understand what we're doing so we can partner with them. So the change management aspect of this becomes key. Because if you're not working with your stakeholders, if you're not working with your partners, you are going to be the cybersecurity group that is just screaming and waving the flag, and everyone's going to think that's code orange. I don't know what that means. So we've got to change our pitch on how we're doing this.
I think you're hitting on something very potent in
that's unusual
with what I see in organizations, and it comes back to adoption, right? whether it's software, whether it's zero trust, whether it's discipline in our processes, we have an implementation issue, right? And I think the way zero trust, and I think you are correct in your assertion, where we're at risk with zero trust with it being totally misunderstood and implementation is at risk. And I think it's because the way that we approach things in government is we don't do piecemeal very well. It's you're all in or you're all out, right? So I think with zero trust specifically, organizations have to have an adoption plan, right? Because everyone's in different places in their organization. Some people are running a lot of tech debt. They do not have the resources or people power to really innovate and build new solutions. Okay, what pillars can we adopt now? What can we do in 6 months? What can we do in a year, 2 years? Okay. Now, of course, we want things to move much faster, right? But at the same time, we don't want to sacrifice the entire mission for not being able to get everything done in 6 months, right? And this is something that we see in the software realm as well, to where we see our customers will procure every solution under the sun, and then it sits on the shelf because we don't have the people to implement. And that's the same thing here with zero trust and policy and processes. Is we need discipline, we need a plan, okay? And let's be deliberate in our approach and adoption of these things.
And that plan has to include the stakeholders. So when we talk about critical infrastructure, it's not the same as IT, right? I mean, I can't go tell an energy provider, hey, go take that system down until you get MFA put on it. It's not going to work. You cannot just say we're going to cut down power to the western half of the United States because this generator did not have MFA, right? So you have to figure out alternatives. You have to figure out strategy. You have to figure out plans. And I mean, in IT, we replace equipment very frequently, right? I mean, every 2 or 3 years, we're changing things out. That's not the case for OT. Some of this stuff have life cycles of decades before it's up for replacement. If we're not involved in the supply chain efforts now to get cybersecurity baked into these things, we are forever going to be in a role of trying to apply cybersecurity after the fact, which everybody knows is not optimal. So we need to start doing this now and getting ahead of this in order to make zero trust an effective strategy inside critical infrastructure.
Yeah, and Sunny, I'd like to touch back on the natural disaster aspect, right? Like the fact that people are coupling these events together is, for me, a little scary.
Well, a lot of the events are scary in and of themselves and the size and the magnitude that they've become, but the general industry of meteorology as a whole, the issue now with some of the social media forecasters that have made their way out, that are utilizing models that they don't understand. They don't have training in, they don't know what they're doing with it. Some of the AI hallucinates the further out that you get because if there's not a low there, it's not going to pick up what it's going to do well, so it's going to make up stuff. We had this issue right after Milton last year where a lot of the far range models were showing another storm system was going to come up Miami, take out the rest of Florida. So Florida had already taken a significant amount of hits. I was working obvious overtime from Helene, Milton, all of the fun weather events throughout the year with tornadoes, with wildfires, with drought. To have to turn around and have so many industry leaders come to me because somebody in their day-to-day saw some TikTok video of somebody who has no background in meteorology saying, this big storm's going to come, it's going to destroy everything, you should move resources. Some of them started to move resources. That was a bigger issue. Leaning on the public without trusting the scientific community because somebody else speaks louder or they speak more confidently about something they know nothing about. And I'm sure many of us have run into that situation. So having to take all of these additional calls, people were spinning up operations centers without understanding what they were doing and that storm wasn't there and there was no way it was going to form physically. The other atmospherics that were at play could be easily explained away with the storm, and it never ended up forming, and those media forecasters were not held accountable for the amount of distrust that was then forced on the meteorological community, the movement of resources, the staff overtime that was then charged to keep people on hand post other events because there was a potential a week later for another one. Why demob, send everyone home, bring them back in. So on the Air Force weather side of the house, when we say things like the National Weather Service taking some budget hits recently and losing some staff, when we're saying we're going to lose all of this forecast capability, we also have meteorological sides in the military. The Air Force, the Navy, the Marines do forecast for every base, every portion of, I was a national lead met when I was in the Air Force. So if you lose access to one notion of weather, you can find it somewhere else. Not to say that, we shouldn't be funding federal weather on that side of the house, because it does make it easy and accessible. But if you have a particular site and you are incredibly worried about it, reach out to all the different meteorological communities that operate scientifically there. The military is more than happy to work hand in hand to help fill some of the gaps that may be forming. There's forecasts that are out there from the scientific communities, the universities. You can reach out internationally and engage with those to be able to cross-reference. Never put all your eggs in one basket. It's the same thing as having a single point of failure. If you believe in just the European model, or just the GFS, or just the NAM, or just the HRRR, like all of these models that exist, you should be looking at all of them. Same thing with the IT. If you're looking at one solution, you should be looking at all of them, weighing them, finding what works best for you. Same thing with weather, finding your high and your low point and being able to make sense of it for your operations.
So if there's one thing that you're all going to take home today, is that you're going to change your passwords, you're going to make sure that everything is secure, and you're going to pay attention to the weather reports, right? Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining me, and please welcome me in thanking our panelists.